The unexpected visitor. The night the stars fell on Gideon Matthews' farm started like any other. He'd finished repairing the irrigation system for his corn fields, had a simple dinner of beef stew, and settled onto his porch with a cold beer, watching the sunset paint the Montana sky in watercolors of amber and purple. At 43, Gideon had grown accustomed to solitude after his wife Eleanor's passing 3 years prior. The 100-acre farm kept him busy enough not to dwell on loneliness. When the first streaks of light tore across the darkening sky, he assumed they were just shooting stars. By the time the third blazing object screamed overhead, rattling his windows and sending his dog Rusty into a barking frenzy, Gideon knew something was wrong. "Easy, boy," he said, placing a calloused hand on the border collie's head. The ground shook as a tremendous crash echoed from the northern edge of his property, where his land met the dense forest and rocky terrain. Gideon grabbed his shotgun and flashlight out of habit. Probably a meteorite, he told himself, but 20 years of rural living had taught him to be prepared. Rusty whined, refusing to follow as Gideon climbed into his weathered pickup truck. The impact site wasn't difficult to find. Trees had been sheared away in a long gouge of earth that ended in a smoking crater about 30 yards wide. What lay at its center, however, was no meteorite. "Holy Mother of God," Gideon whispered, training his flashlight on the twisted metal and crystalline structure half buried in the dirt. The object was clearly manufactured, a vessel of some kind with an asymmetrical design that hurt his eyes if he looked at it too long. Parts of it glowed with a soft blue luminescence that pulsed like a heartbeat. Caution told him to back away, call the authorities. But curiosity, that dangerous human trait, pulled him forward. That's when he heard it. A sound somewhere between a whimper and a clicking chirp coming from behind a section of shattered hull. Gideon rounded the debris and found himself face to face with something impossible. The creature was roughly the size of a large wolf, but any similarity to Earth's fauna ended there. Its body was covered in plates that looked like a cross between chitin and metal, with 6 limbs ending in delicate digits. Its head was angular, with 3 sets of eyes that dimly reflected his flashlight beam. One of its limbs was bent at an unnatural angle, and a viscous fluid that shimmered with bioluminescence seeped from several wounds on its torso. Gideon raised his shotgun instinctively, but as the creature's eyes locked with his, he felt something unexpected, not fear, but a profound sense of pain and desperation that wasn't entirely his own. The creature made that strange chirping sound again, then collapsed. Gideon Matthews had spent his life making practical decisions. He'd chosen practical crops, practical equipment, and had married a practical woman who'd appreciated his no-nonsense approach to life. What he did next defied all practical sense. He put down his shotgun, approached the alien being, and carefully began to examine its wounds. "You're in rough shape, whatever you are," he murmured. The creature's breathing was labored but steady. Gideon removed his jacket and gently placed it beneath the being's head. "I must have lost my damn mind." Getting the creature into his truck was a challenge. It weighed more than it appeared, and though unconscious, it occasionally spasmed, nearly taking Gideon's head off with a reflexive swipe of its clawed appendage. By the time he managed to load it into the truck bed and cover it with a tarp, dawn was breaking over the eastern horizon. The old barn seemed the safest place. Gideon cleared a space in the back storage room, laid down fresh hay, and created a makeshift bed. Throughout the process, the creature remained mostly unconscious, stirring only when Gideon attempted to clean its wounds with water and antiseptic. "I don't know if this will help or poison you," he told it as he worked, "but it's all I've got." By midday, Gideon had done what he could. The creature's broken limb had been splintered with pieces of wood and wrapped in gauze. Its wounds had been cleaned and bandaged, though the shimmering fluid continued to seep through in places. He'd left water and, on a ridiculous impulse, a plate of raw meat, vegetables, and fruit, covering all possible dietary needs he could imagine. As he was about to leave the barn, the alien's eyes opened again. All 6 of them focused on him with an intensity that froze him in place. Then came a sensation, not a sound or a voice, but a feeling in his mind. Gratitude, unmistakable despite its alienness. "You're welcome," Gideon said awkwardly. "I guess." Over the next 3 days, Gideon fell into a strange routine. He'd tend his fields in the morning, check on his unusual guest at midday, then return in the evening with more food and fresh water. The creature, which Gideon had begun referring to as Vex after the complex geometric patterns on its carapace, seemed to be healing at an astonishing rate. By the 4th day, it was moving around the storage room, examining tools and farm implements with obvious curiosity. Communication remained limited to those strange emotional projections. Gideon would feel curiosity, gratitude, occasional pain, or what he interpreted as questions, though he couldn't define what was being asked. He found himself talking to Vex anyway, explaining farming equipment or describing his daily routine. "I don't know if you understand a word I'm saying," he told it on the 5th evening, "but talking to someone, even someone who looks like you, beats talking to myself." That night, Gideon awoke to the sound of helicopters. Black shapes with searchlights swept across his property, hovering low over the northern section where the crash had occurred. Gideon watched from his bedroom window, heart pounding. Within an hour, vehicles began arriving, military trucks and unmarked SUVs. By morning, a perimeter had been established around the crash site. Men in hazmat suits moved through the area, and Gideon was met at the edge of his property by 2 individuals in dark suits. "Mr. Matthews," the woman said, flashing government credentials too quickly for him to read. "I'm Agent Nolan. This is Agent Reeves. We're investigating a possible meteorite impact on your property." "Meteorite?" Gideon repeated, putting on his best confused farmer act. "Is that what all this fuss is about? Have you noticed anything unusual in the past few days? Any debris, strange weather patterns, wildlife behaving oddly?" Agent Reeves asked, his eyes scanning Gideon's face for signs of deception. "Just you folks trampling my north field," Gideon replied. "How long will you be on my property?" "As long as necessary," Agent Nolan said with a thin smile. "Please continue your normal routine, but stay clear of the marked areas." As they walked away, Gideon overheard Reeves murmur, "Signal's completely gone. Whatever it was, it's not transmitting anymore." Gideon rushed to the barn as soon as they left. Vex was huddled in the corner, its body trembling slightly. The emotional projection it sent was unmistakable, fear. "They're looking for you, aren't they?" Gideon whispered. A wave of confirmation washed over him, stronger than any previous communication. Then, unexpectedly, Gideon heard, or rather felt, a voice in his mind. "Danger. Hunters." Gideon staggered backward. "You can talk. Learning. Your language. Neural patterns." The communication was halting, like someone thumbing through a dictionary. "They seek. Destroy. Why? Who are you?" Images flooded Gideon's mind, stars, planets, vessels like the one that had crashed, beings similar to Vex but with variations. War. Pursuit. Escape. Refugee, came the simplified concept after the barrage of images subsided. "You're running from something," Gideon interpreted. "Yes. Protection needed. Temporary." Gideon paced the barn, running his hand through his thinning hair. "This is insane. I'm harboring an alien fugitive. They'll throw me in prison if they find you here. We'll leave. When healed. Promise." Something in the sincerity of the communication touched Gideon. He thought of Eleanor, how she'd always taken in strays, injured birds, abandoned cats, once even a fox kit with a broken leg. "You'd do it for anything in need," she told him when he'd questioned her soft heart. "All right," he decided. "But we need to move you. They're going to search the property eventually." That night, Gideon used his truck to transport Vex to an abandoned mining cave in the hills behind his property. The cave had been part of a silver mining operation in the 1880s but had been sealed off after a collapse. Gideon had discovered it as a boy and had kept it as his secret hideaway. Now it would serve as Vex's sanctuary. As the days passed, Vex's telepathic abilities grew stronger, as did its command of English. Gideon learned that Vex was not its name but rather its species, a race of beings from a system Gideon couldn't pronounce. Its actual designation translated roughly to Seeker of Peaceful Waters, which Gideon shortened to Waters. Meanwhile, the military presence around the crash site intensified. Gideon noticed unusual equipment being brought in, and the perimeter expanded to include more of his property. Twice, teams with handheld devices swept past the barn where Waters had initially stayed. On the 10th day, Waters revealed something troubling. They have detection device. Can sense my kind's neural patterns when we communicate telepathically. Is that how they found your ship? Gideon asked. Yes. Must limit communication. But must also warn you. Warn me about what? Not alone. Others coming. Both hunters and my people. Earth in danger. Caught between. Before Waters could elaborate, a high-pitched whine filled the air. Waters convulsed, its body contorting in pain. What's happening? Gideon demanded, rushing to the alien's side. Scanner. Activated. Full spectrum. Waters managed to project through obvious agony. They know. I am here. Outside the cave, floodlights suddenly illuminated the hillside. The sound of vehicles and shouting men echoed through the night. Gideon Matthews, practical farmer, widower, and now accomplice to an extraterrestrial refugee, took a deep breath and helped Waters to its feet. Then we better get moving, he said. Because I'm not letting them take you. The hunt had begun, and with it, humanity's unwitting entry into a cosmic conflict beyond anything Gideon could have imagined. The refugee of war. Darkness had settled over the Montana hills as Gideon and Waters fled deeper into the wilderness. The military vehicles' searchlights carved through the forest behind them, accompanied by the steady thrum of helicopter rotors overhead. Gideon led the way through a creek bed, hoping the running water would mask their scent from any tracking dogs. Can you move any faster? Gideon whispered, glancing back at Waters who was struggling to keep pace, its injured limb still not fully healed. Trying, came the strained telepathic reply. Scanner technology, disrupting neural pathways. The alien's normally iridescent carapace had dulled to a sickly gray, and its movements were becoming increasingly erratic. Gideon stopped, crouching beside a fallen tree to reassess their situation. We need to get you somewhere they can't find you, he said, watching Waters' 6 eyes flicker with diminishing energy. But first we need to block whatever's hurting you. Waters extended a trembling appendage toward Gideon's jacket pocket. Your communication device. Can modify. Gideon pulled out his old flip phone, raising an eyebrow. This thing barely gets reception out here. What can you do with it? Without answering, Waters extracted a small crystalline component from a hidden recess in its exoskeleton. With dexterous movements that belied its weakened state, it began disassembling the phone, integrating the crystal into its circuitry. Quantum shield generator. Primitive but sufficient. When Waters finished, the phone had been transformed into something barely recognizable, with the crystal pulsing with the same blue luminescence as the crashed ship. Waters positioned it between them, and immediately, the alien's posture improved as a subtle vibration filled the air around them. Temporary protection, Waters explained. Shields my neural signature. How long will it last? Hours. Perhaps a day. A shout from less than 100 yards away ended their conversation. They moved deeper into the forest, eventually finding shelter in a cave system Gideon had explored in his youth. By dawn, they were miles from the farm, huddled in a rocky crevice as military aircraft continued to sweep the area. It was there, in the faint morning light, that Waters finally revealed the full truth. Your world stands at the intersection of territories claimed by 2 cosmic powers, Waters began, its telepathic voice stronger now. The hegemony and the collective. Waters projected images into Gideon's mind, vast armadas of ships, worlds encircled by artificial rings, beings both familiar and utterly alien in form. My people, the Vex, are neither. We are observers. Archivists. We document the rise and fall of civilizations. Like some kind of galactic historians? Gideon asked. Yes. We observe without interference. This has been our way for millennia. Until now, Gideon guessed. Until now, Waters confirmed. The hegemony discovered our ability to access and store the complete neural patterns of species we study. They believe this gives us power to influence galactic events. Can you influence events? Waters' body shifted in what Gideon had come to recognize as its equivalent of a shrug. We can understand. Predict, sometimes. Not control. So why are they hunting you? Fear. The hegemony fears knowledge they cannot possess. The collective wants to use it as a weapon. Waters' telepathic voice grew heavy with emotion. My vessel was part of an evacuation fleet. We scattered across unexplored regions when our homeworld fell. And you crash-landed here, Gideon finished. But why Earth? Why now? Not accident. Earth has been monitored. Your species shows potential. Adaptability. Creativity despite limitations. Waters' eyes focused intently on Gideon. The Vex have visited before, throughout your history. The implication struck Gideon like a physical blow. You're saying aliens, your people, have been visiting Earth for centuries? Yes. Observing. Documenting. Never interfering directly. Waters projected images of ancient civilizations, structures that historians had attributed to remarkable human ingenuity. Sometimes, inspiring. Before Gideon could process this revelation, the modified phone began to flash erratically. Waters quickly disassembled it, removing the crystal. Shield failing. Must move. They spent the day evading patrols, using Waters' increasingly sporadic telepathic abilities to detect approaching threats. By nightfall, they reached a small town called Pinewood Junction, where Gideon hoped to find temporary sanctuary with an old friend. Emmett Grady had served with Gideon in the army before retiring to open a general store on the outskirts of town. He'd always been the type to question authority and keep to himself, qualities Gideon desperately needed now. Gid? Emmett stood in his doorway, shotgun loosely held in one hand as he squinted at his unexpected visitor. The hell are you doing here at this hour? Need help, Gideon said simply. And I need you not to ask too many questions. Emmett's eyes narrowed, then drifted to the strange shape concealed under the tarp in Gideon's truck bed. Government boys in suits came by yesterday. Asking about strange sightings, unusual activity. Offering rewards for information. I'm in trouble, Emmett. But it's not what you think. Never is with you, Emmett sighed, stepping aside. Bring your whatever it is around back. Through the storeroom. Once inside and away from prying eyes, Gideon revealed Waters. To his credit, Emmett didn't run or reach for his shotgun. He just stared for a long moment, then walked to a cabinet and pulled out a bottle of whiskey. Start talking, he said, pouring 3 fingers into a glass. Gideon explained everything while Waters rested in a corner, conserving energy. Emmett listened without interruption, occasionally glancing at the alien with a mixture of fear and fascination. Always knew we weren't alone, Emmett said when Gideon finished. Just didn't expect to have proof in my storeroom. He drained his glass. What's your plan? Don't have one yet, Gideon admitted. Can't go home. Can't outrun them forever. I might know someone who can help, Emmett said after a thoughtful pause. Woman named Juniper Hollis. Lives about 40 miles north. She's been talking about strange lights and government cover-ups for years. Everyone thinks she's crazy, but maybe she isn't, Gideon finished. That night, they stayed in Emmett's basement while he gathered supplies and information. Waters used the opportunity to repair its makeshift shield generator, integrating parts from Emmett's old radio equipment. "Your friend," Waters communicated as they prepared to leave at dawn. "He was not surprised by my existence." "Emmett's always been open-minded," Gideon replied, "but he'd noticed it too, the lack of shock, the ready acceptance." "He has encountered my kind before," Waters stated. "The neural pattern recognition is unmistakable. He does not remember, but the experience is there." The revelation disturbed Gideon more than he wanted to admit. How many humans had encountered the Vex without realizing it? How much of human history had been quietly observed or subtly influenced by alien watchers? They left Pinewood Junction in Emmett's truck, which was less likely to be recognized than Gideon's. The journey to Juniper Hollis's property took them through increasingly remote terrain. According to Emmett, Juniper had once worked for a government research facility before abruptly quitting and retreating from public life. Her home turned out to be a converted missile silo, a relic of the Cold War, now transformed into a fortified compound ringed with surveillance equipment. It took nearly an hour of waiting at the gate before a wiry woman with silver-streaked hair and piercing eyes emerged to meet them. "Emmett said you needed help," she said without preamble, her gaze instantly fixing on the tarp-covered shape in the truck bed. "He didn't mention you were bringing company." "This is complicated," Gideon began. "It always is," Juniper cut him off. "Bring it inside before the satellites make another pass." The interior of the silo had been converted into a combination living space and research facility. Screens displayed data feeds from what appeared to be custom-built monitoring systems. Maps covered one wall, marked with pins and notations in a shorthand Gideon couldn't decipher. When Waters was revealed, Juniper showed no surprise at all. She circled the alien with clinical interest, occasionally making notes on a tablet. "Vex morphology," she murmured. "Archivist cast, judging by the cranial structure." "How badly damaged was your ship?" Waters and Gideon exchanged a look of surprise. "Completely," Waters projected, the telepathic message apparently reaching Juniper as well. "You have encountered my kind." "Not personally," Juniper replied. "But I've spent 20 years studying the evidence." She gestured to her wall of data. Crash sites, witness accounts, unexplained technological leaps throughout history. The pattern was clear, once I knew what to look for. She turned to Gideon. "The government knows too. Has for decades. There's a specialized unit that handles these encounters, contains them, covers them up, and exploits any technology they can salvage." "Project Horizon," Waters supplied. "Yes. They detected my distress beacon upon entering your atmosphere." Juniper nodded grimly. "They'll have the crash site stripped and sanitized by now. Standard procedure. But they won't stop looking for you." She pointed to Waters. "You're the real prize. A living specimen." "We need to get Waters somewhere safe," Gideon insisted. "Somewhere they can't find it." "There is nowhere on Earth they can't eventually find it," Juniper replied. "Not while it's alive and generating neural patterns." "Then we need to find a way to contact others of its kind," Gideon said. Waters said there were more ships that scattered when their homeworld fell. Juniper considered this, then gestured for them to follow her to a lower level of the silo. There, in what had once been the missile chamber, stood a massive array of cobbled-together communications equipment. "I've been trying to establish contact for years," she explained. "Sending signals on frequencies I've calculated based on previous encounters. Nothing so far, but with a living Vex to help calibrate." Over the next 2 days, Waters and Juniper worked tirelessly to modify the array. Gideon helped where he could, but mostly stayed on lookout, monitoring Juniper's surveillance feeds for any sign of pursuit. By the 3rd day, they were ready to attempt contact. "The signal will be detected," Waters warned. "Project Horizon will trace it immediately. Then we'll only have one chance," Juniper said, making final adjustments. The moment the array activated, Waters connected to it telepathically, channeling its neural patterns into the transmission. The effort clearly caused the alien great pain, but it persisted, broadcasting what it described as memory coordinates that would guide any Vex vessel in the vicinity to their location. Minutes later, alarms blared across Juniper's surveillance system. "Multiple vehicles approaching," she announced. "Military grade. ETA 15 minutes. "Did it work?" Gideon asked Waters, who had collapsed from the effort. "Unknown," the alien replied weakly. "Signal sent. Response uncertain." Juniper activated a series of defensive measures around the compound, nothing that would stop a military assault for long, but enough to buy them time. As they retreated to the upper levels, she handed Gideon a flash drive. "Everything I've documented. In case." She didn't finish the thought. The first helicopters appeared on the horizon just as they reached the surface level. Vehicles were visible on the access road, still miles away but closing fast. "You should leave," Waters told them. "I will surrender. Perhaps prevent violence." "Like hell," Gideon growled. "I didn't save you from that crash site just to hand you over to them now. Your species is not ready for the conflict that surrounds you," Waters insisted. "The hegemony, the collective, they will tear your world apart in their struggle. I cannot allow that." Before they could argue further, a new alarm sounded. Juniper rushed to her monitors, eyes widening at what she saw. "Atmospheric disturbance," she reported. "Massive energy signature descending from orbit. Unlike anything I've recorded before." The sky above the compound suddenly darkened as clouds formed and swirled unnaturally. Lightning crackled in patterns too geometric to be natural. They heard, Waters said, its telepathic voice filled with something like awe. "The Council." They answered. The approaching helicopters veered off, clearly detecting the anomaly. Ground vehicles halted their advance. Above them, the swirling clouds parted to reveal something that defied easy description, not a ship in the conventional sense, but a shimmering distortion in reality itself, through which glimpses of impossible geometries could be seen. "What is that?" Gideon whispered. "Vex Sanctuary vessel," Waters replied. "They rarely intervene directly. This is unprecedented." A beam of light engulfed them, not blinding, but somehow enhancing perception, allowing Gideon to see in spectrums beyond normal human capability. Within this light, new figures appeared, Vex-like Waters, but larger, their carapaces marked with complex patterns that seemed to shift and move. One approached Waters, communicated in a telepathic language too complex for Gideon to comprehend. Then it turned its attention to him and Juniper. Gideon Matthews, the telepathic voice was unlike Waters, deeper, more resonant, carrying impressions of vast knowledge and age. "You have shown compassion to one of our kind at great personal risk. This will not be forgotten." "What happens now?" Gideon asked. "Now we must withdraw," the elder Vex explained. "Your world stands at a crossroads. The arrival of our vessel will have alerted both the hegemony and the collective to Earth's importance. Conflict is inevitable. You're leaving." Gideon couldn't hide his dismay. "After everything Waters told me about the danger Earth is in." "Not abandoning," the elder clarified. "Preparing. Your species must be ready for what comes. We will return when the time is right." Another beam of light, this one concentrated on Waters, who began to rise from the ground. The injured Vex projected one final message to Gideon. "Remember what you have learned. Tell others the truth. Prepare them." As Waters ascended toward the vessel, the elder Vex approached Gideon once more. "Your actions have altered the course of events, Gideon Matthews. One sentient being showing compassion to another, even across the gulf of different worlds. Such things ripple through the cosmos." The elder placed something in Gideon's hand, a crystal similar to the one Waters had used, but more complex, with depth that seemed to extend beyond its physical boundaries. When the storm comes, this will guide you to us. The light intensified, then retracted. The Vex, including Waters, vanished into their vessel, which folded somehow into dimensions Gideon's mind couldn't process. In moments, the sky was clear again, with only the approaching military vehicles as evidence that anything unusual had occurred. Juniper gripped Gideon's arm. "We need to move. Now." But Gideon stood transfixed, staring at the crystal in his palm and the approaching forces of Project Horizon. "No," he said finally. "No more running. No more hiding." He turned to Juniper, determination hardening his features. "The Vex said Earth needs to be ready. That starts with the truth." As the military vehicles surrounded the compound and armed personnel took positions, Gideon Matthews, simple farmer, accidental alien savior, and now humanity's unlikely ambassador to the stars, stepped forward to meet them, the crystal clutched tightly in his hand. The fate of Earth hung in the balance, caught between cosmic powers beyond human comprehension. But Gideon had learned one crucial truth from his time with Waters: compassion, even across the gulf of different worlds, could change everything. And in the vast darkness of space, Waters and the Vex Council watched Earth reseed beneath them, knowing that the first seeds of alliance had been planted. Whether they would grow in time to save humanity from the coming storm remained to be seen.